Hi, and welcome to the 7th episode of the Growth Machines podcast. I'm your host, Vincent Jong, and today I'll talk with Japna Sethi about how to combine product-led customer acquisition strategies with a sales team. This interview is part of my book about product-led sales. If you're wondering how to introduce PLG into your sales operation, then check out plgandsales.com for more info. Now about Japna. She's currently a product and growth director at Calendly. Before this, she has led product growth in a number of well-known companies. For example, she was a lead for product and growth at Dropbox, and she built and led the growth team at Product Board from the ground up. She's based out of San Francisco and also advises and invests in companies that need help with their growth. All right. Hi, Japna. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you've been part of a number of successful companies that use PLG especially to grow their audience. I was wondering, have you noticed any pattern between these companies that contributes to their success?
A few things that I've noticed are more around practices of how you think about strategy. So one thing is, I think a lot of companies tend to think about PLG and SLG, sales-led growth, as black and white, two different binary options that they must choose from, and makes this choice, gives people choice paralysis to figure out what's a good fit for their product, for their target customer and their market. And I don't think that choice is as binary or as black and white as people make it seem to be. I think about the go-to-market motion as a spectrum where you have, pure play PLG and pure enterprise sales on either side of the spectrum. And as we evolve, as new companies develop, as markets change, we're trying to figure out, where are we on the spectrum? Are we a little bit more product-led? Or are we a little bit more sales-led? And so I think that if you are kind of more flexible in your thinking of how you define your go-to-market model, and you can be nuanced in your way of understanding your product. Is it a little bit more complex, or is it easier? Is it, how do you find your customer? What are the right buyer types, et cetera? And how does the market actually change as time goes on? Some markets can be new, some markets can be established. If you take all of these inputs into how you think about your go-to-market motion, you can be a little bit more flexible in determining where you are between PLG and SLG, and also how much you don't know yet, because you have yet to learn and experiment. So that's one kind of learning that I've had over time as I've worked the companies I've worked at and helped some of the companies that I've been advising. Another important point to make in terms of patterns of success is that, and this is also a pitfall that I've seen as well. So it's double-sided. But essentially, once you have, a set of hypotheses that you want to learn about, that you want to validate or invalidate, you need to actually give it the time it needs for you to invalidate or validate that hypothesis. I think I've seen many examples where folks have not given strategies a really good shot, and then maybe they see some early signal that doesn't look good, and they just automatically put a stamp of failure, then they move on. And, maybe 6 to 12 months later, they think, oh, well, we didn't do this properly, or we didn't set this up right, or didn't design that experiment properly. Therefore, the hypothesis still remains. Should we test this again? And it kind of just makes teams kind of cycle back and forth on decisions, instead of just having confidence that something worked or didn't work. And so really good teams will actually give the strategy a good shot, and then have confidence that they give a stamp of failure or a stamp of success, and then they move on to the next thing. So those are two, I would say, overarching patterns of success that I've seen across many companies.
Great, thank you. And another pitfall or challenge, I guess, that is often the case when you're using PLG for reaching a wider audience, is it can take a while until you see results. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think you're referring to the case where if a company is deciding that they want to implement PLG, they kind of have expectations that it's going to take really a short amount of time to decide if that's actually going to work for them or not. Correct? Yeah. So this kind of goes back to, just as you mentioned, these pitfalls. A lot of companies that I advise will say, well, we're going to do, we're going to do like a PLG learning experiments this quarter, and we're going to see if PLG works for us or not. And I said, well, that's really this manage your own expectations properly is what I would say. And I'll always say, wait, that's not how it works. People think of PLG as some magic growth motion that as soon as you turn it on, do some hacky experiment where you change a button color or something, or just add a trial, everything becomes better and you have hockey stick growth and whatnot. And I don't know that there's a specific place I can pinpoint where these misconceptions have come from. I think it's because when we first coined the term growth, excuse me, it came from a world of consumer and social media products that were actually operating at pretty high scale and have even higher scale today. And so experiments at a small scale could actually lead to medium to larger impact and a lot of learnings about consumer behavior, because that was the nature of the product. It was high frequency engagement, and applying the scientific method was relatively easier there. But we're operating in a world where a lot of B2B SaaS companies want to try PLG, and it's just not the same. You just can't have the same expectations about how fast things are going to take. Plus, we have things like product-led sales and how to combine PLG with traditional enterprise sales motions. So it's just not something you can turn on overnight and then see if an experiment works right away or not. So that's kind of the spiel I give folks. Manage your own expectations. Make sure you're applying the nuance of your product from where all of these principles of growth have originally come from. For folks who have never tried any PLG type of methodology before, I usually say it takes a minimum of 12 months to see any fruits of your labor, sometimes even longer than that. And that's normal for other B2B, B2B2C products. So pace yourself. And again, back to my your original question, and one of my philosophies is give time to a strategy, give it proper time. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. The other thing I'd mention, I think is also important, is that your approach to testing PLG is a portfolio approach of many different types of hypotheses and strategies that you may have at play. So be really careful about how you design your portfolio approach, right? You want to make sure that it's balanced. Don't lose sight of other opportunities as well. And keep in mind that you actually have flexibility in balancing short-term bets with long-term bets. Short-term bets can be things like helping you to understand if you should invest in something in the long term, if it's a new opportunity area you've never touched before, you guys haven't done research on it. You can implement some short-term experiments that are learning experiments, and then if they're successful, you can say, great, this is a great long-term bet that I can invest a little bit more in and do something that is probably going to have larger impact and larger investment as well, but it's worth it because we have some more confidence now. So you can use different approaches. You don't have to just say, tomorrow I'm going to build a trial and a freemium product, and I'm going to put all these viral loops, and our PLG model is going to work. No, it's a lot of work, and you don't even know if those are the right methodologies for you. So pace yourself, set milestones, and try to develop a kind of a portfolio approach to your strategic approach overall.
You're touching a few times already on the combination of PLG with sales. Can you share any examples of how you combined a product-led acquisition strategy with a sales team?
Yeah. As you mentioned, I mentioned a few times the kind of how we might work with sales, or the expectation that you might work with sales. And this is because of the overall evolution of what we call growth today, from this consumer-y social media era to, prosumer era to now what we're doing is applying a lot of these methodologies to B2B products. And in B2B, traditionally, it was enterprise sales where a sales team would have some leads, inbound or outbound, and they would do a 30-minute demo with someone, maybe do a POC, get to know all the folks, the members of the team, prospects, get to know all of the folks on the prospects team, and, do kind of traditional POC, maybe sign a deal, etc. And that's a lot of human calories to land one deal. And sometimes you need to spend those human calories to land a deal because maybe it's a larger mid-market enterprise customer, or maybe it's a very complex product, or maybe there's multiple decision makers in the process within the prospect. And so you need to kind of work it a little bit more. However, the benefit of having both a successful PLG and SLG model together is to drive efficiency. And I mentioned go-to-market as a spectrum with each of them at each side. And you kind of have to figure out where you are on the spectrum. So I call that like the API between PLG and SLG. And folks call this product-led sales. But you kind of have to figure out where is that threshold? Where is that API? And how do you kind of communicate across it between teams? So it's really important. Vincent, you asked about product-led acquisition. So this is essentially how you can use the existing product or existing users on your product to create more leads eventually, and potentially even combine them with the sales approach. So a few different examples, actually pretty much almost from all of my last companies, we were able to implement this or do this in some way. So for example, at Dropbox, we started as a prosumer product. We created a Teams collaboration product. We called that Dropbox Business. And one of the key signals for potentially creating a lead and sending this lead to the sales team to start talking to them and understanding their use cases more was, how many members do you have on a team? If you reached a certain threshold, perhaps it was a good idea to talk to sales. We started really simple because this API was just not a thing. No one talked about it before. And so we literally didn't know what we were doing. And we just, put a stake in the ground and experimented with that. And it was a new business, and we grew the Dropbox business, started the business quite fast to this approach. At Product Board, the product is a little bit more complex. So it was a little bit more of a product-led sales model where we use top funnel to drive our sales team. But very similarly, it's a collaborative product. The value of the product is so much more if you use it within a team and with multiple personas in your team. And again, if you had a certain team size, or you had multiple different types of people in the team, like a product manager, product marketing, persona, engineer, etc., those would be signals to say, okay, let's send this lead to sales. Let's see if we can have a chat, because we can uncover more complex use cases that our product can solve for them. And even at Calendly, very similar to the Dropbox example, started prosumer for the individual, but layered on a bunch of Teams use cases. We have use cases like round robin, where someone can schedule a meeting with anyone on the team, collective group events, things like that, especially for sales and recruiting personas. And so again, if you are using these types of collaborative features, you're engaging with other folks inside of your workspace, those are signals to send to sales. And all of this is essentially a way to come up with key indicators or attributes of an account that sales can use to personalize conversations, right? Sales already has like firmographic and demographic data, right? We use third-party services to enrich that data, but this is actually product behavior that signal is a high signal, I would say, to more complex use cases that is worth talking about. Maybe is harder to discover, maybe it's harder to explain, that a high velocity sales team can help explain. And so we call that, kind of identifying a PQA or a PQL, and end up kind of generating a system of creating those and sending those to the appropriate sales team, depending on some of those attributes.
Yeah, it sounds like the team metrics are kind of the key here for each of the companies that you mentioned there, which makes a lot of sense if you think about what you're trying to do. Have you ever seen cases where it didn't work out as you hoped it would?
Yeah, I would say two ways to answer that question. Specifically with the Teams use cases, not every product has a Teams use case. So that it just has to be that in productivity. I worked a lot in productivity specific B2B SaaS, and so that the collaboration aspect is a really great engagement loop and a high intent signal, as we discussed. But your product may not be collaborative. It may not make sense to be collaborative, and that's maybe not where the value is. That doesn't mean that there aren't other signals that you can use to help understand if that customer, that account has high intent to talk to sales. Again, got to be nuanced to what your product is and what your target customer is. So that's one thing to say. And then the other way to answer your question is basically where have I seen issues or pitfalls of PLG teams working with sales teams or trying to work with sales teams, or vice versa, and where it didn't work, where this API kind of crashed, essentially. And there are a few, probably a lot more pitfalls that I'm going to mention, but off the top of my head, sometimes, you have a really, especially when market conditions change, you have a really eager and hungry sales team, and perhaps your overall funnel is not generating enough leads, or overgrew your sales team, and so your sales team starts to cherry pick in other pools of users that are not necessarily explicitly PQAs or PQLs that were sent to them. And when they start to cherry pick, on the PLG side, you get lower and lower intent, lower quality users. And so your metrics tend to degrade because they're taking the cream at the top, essentially. That also has effects on the sales team because their efficiency metrics are also degrading, but they're trying to meet quota. So they're incentivized to do something a little bit opposite than the API that you set up. That doesn't work well because both of you are suffering at the end of the day. Both of your metrics are suffering at the end of the day. And then this leads me to the second pitfall, which is when that happens, your overall efficiency is also degrading. When I'm saying efficiency, I'm talking about, for example, I'm going back to that concept of the human calories spent. I like to use the term human calories because people are like, oh yeah, it is energy that we have to spend. But essentially, your sales team is going to be spending their time trying to close deals on deal sizes that are going to be lower and lower if they are cherry picking into the PLG pool. For example, I've seen companies where sales teams are spending time on deals between 2 and 5K. That's pretty low. I don't think the ROI is there. It doesn't really make sense for them to spend those calories because that calorie isn't going to translate into more dollars than what you would if you had just let them convert self-serve or with, high velocity assist motion. And so you have to always keep in mind, what is that ratio? What is the ROI? And is it is it a ratio that actually makes sense for the business to continue operating at efficiently?
And we're talking about sales all this time, but what about support and customer success? Like, what are some examples of product growth teams working collaboratively with this part of the go-to-market?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You're right. We always love to talk about sales a little bit more, and then customer support and success are the follow-ups. But I actually really truly believe they need to have a seat at the table when it comes to creating cross organizational growth team and taking care of your self-serve customers or the lower touch customer segment. It's really important to work collaboratively with support customer success. I actually find that they're one of the teams that have some of the best kind of customer feedback and nuanced understanding of how customers are operating their product, more so than any product research you can do on your own. So definitely take advantage of your success team. One example where I think I've worked with customer success quite collaboratively and it was really successful was at Product Board, where we were starting to build a scaled customer success team. So it's folks that would they would have goals and metrics against some of the lower touch customer segment and the wider audience that you talked about. And we wanted to basically create an integrated customer experience, both in product and using out of product channels that were kind of all towards the same goal. So it'd be consistent and unified communication messaging, depending on what were the goals for that customer. And Product Boards has quite a complex product. We serve product management teams that help them plan, generate insights from the customers and market, help them kind of create strategies and then ultimately roadmaps to execute again. So it owns kind of the product management lifecycle end to end. And so we said, okay, we need to figure out, we've got a good handle on our trial, but our trial is really short and we need to kind of figure out what is the customer journey for a new customer overall, even someone who's converted, right? Let's look at it at month 1 and month 3 and be a little bit more prescriptive on what are the specific milestones we want a customer to achieve and what does health mean and look like, and how can we create something a little bit more holistic in terms of the user experience and journey. And we did this exercise and we partnered very closely with customer success because they had been working on this part of the user journey for a really long time and knew a ton about the different pathways it would take to get a customer to be healthy and green. And we did this exercise both from a quantitative perspective and a qualitative perspective. And we created this map, this 90-day journey map. And it was an artifact for us as a team, but it was also an artifact for customer success because they had been kind of a part of it from the beginning and bought into, this design exercise. And so we were all aligned on this living artifact that was actually stayed useful and stayed alive for quite a long time. And then the second thing that was really great is that we created goals that were either shared goals or complementary goals in terms of metrics that we wanted our teams to drive. And that's wonderful because when you are working with a different department and their goals are completely different or even worse, slightly opposite than yours, your cross-organizational growth team, which really should be, everyone from every channel, has tension and conflict when they're trying to figure out how to execute a project. And when your goals are shared or complementary, the tension is gone and the meetings are so much more effective and collaborative. And that's, and what ended up happening at Product Board in our relationship with the customer success team because it was just so collaborative. And so my overall advice and takeaway from this example is make sure you're inviting and involving your cross-organizational team members early on and getting their buy-in, right? Stakeholder management one-on-one, but it's always easy to forget. And try to shoot for shared goals or complementary goals. So it'll make your life and your your team members' lives a lot easier.
But you've been at some companies that you said already had this prosumer focus. So they're creating a large user base. How do you handle that in those scenarios?
Yeah, so generally, basically, they have a very large free user base that they kind of monetize over time. And in that case, your support team they have to prioritize their time and which types of customers they support in that case. So we did have another model that we used to collaborate with support and customer success. Again, this probably has a name today in the realm of high velocity sales, but at the time I was working at Dropbox, this really didn't have a name. So we were trying to figure things out on our own and experiment with what would work. So we had our prosumer products, and we also had started to introduce our more complex Teams use cases and features and eventually SKUs. And we wanted to see if, a human in the loop, a calorie from a human or two could help increase conversion. And we actually worked with our support team first. These were folks who knew the product really well, knew the customer really well, could help customers make decisions, could unblock things or reduce friction for the customers in our product. And we're used to giving a lot of support, but obviously, if you have millions of free users and then billions of paid users, you have to prioritize your time. So we basically created a set of experiments where we would proactively kind of show pop-ups, chat pop-ups in different parts of the product, first starting with conversion moments to basically have someone say, hey, this is, Japna from the support team. Any questions I can help answer for you? To kind of see like you might be having trouble making a decision. And a user might see that and say, yeah, actually, I don't understand the difference between this plan and this plan, or this is my situation and I'm not sure what's the best fit. Any questions like that. And then that person would answer that question and help that user. So we started experimenting with this motion with a few, just that conversion, small percentage of the population, very small support team as well. And we just wanted to see, is this going to generate more revenue than if we didn't do anything at all and the user was just thinking about the decision on their own? We saw success there. So then we thought, okay, let's double down on this and create a few different types of experiments at different parts of the funnel too. Maybe we can expand this to different user types as well. So we started at conversion. Then we also wanted to help people kind of make the jump between free and trials. So generating more trial starts was another kind of important decision point. And then eventually grew this program quite large over time, where we had to kind of spin out our own team of what we called support assist, or I think a lot of people call them product specialists today. But essentially these people have deeper technical knowledge of the product and can help users and customers make decisions, reduce friction in their conversion moments. And essentially kind of, we needed support assist, but it became its own organization overall. So it grew into a very large organization that supported the self-serve product-led growth motion, and essentially was our version of high velocity sales. And this was not leads that we sent to sales like PQLs or anything like that. This was simply just what did we think were some friction points where human in the loop could help reduce friction. And that was how we kind of scaled that out over a really large user base at Dropbox.
And that's, I guess, how support even becomes a profit center instead of only looked at as a cost center.
Yes, exactly. They started having revenue goals and conversion goals after proving out certain success.
That's right. Amazing. Last question from my side for today. Taking a step back, like what are the three things you look at when assessing whether a PLG strategy is right for a business?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing is kind of going back to, Vincent, the beginning of our conversation today, where I talked about the go-to-market motion and how it's a spectrum with PLG on one side and SLG on one side, and we're all trying to figure out where we are on that spectrum of go-to-market motions. And you have to kind of be honest about what your product is and who your target customer is, the market looks like. But you can do a few thought exercises around this. So, for example, there is a company that I invested in, a few companies I've invested in, where they actually sell tools directly to growth teams or PLG teams or high velocity teams. And that's their target market. So they're always talking about growth. They want to be as product led as possible. But their own go-to-market motion doesn't really make sense to have a PLG go-to-market motion because the market is just not that large. So they need to kind of go outbound, do a lot of content marketing and branding, and essentially find those specific buyers and decision makers who will purchase that tool. A lot of these product-led sales tools, these AI-based product-led sales tools, that's the motion that makes sense to them, given the market size and the buyers and the complexity of the product and the ACV of the product. So just be honest about your product and who you're targeting and how long it takes to implement, how long it takes to get value, what that motion is going to look like. You can always improve it over time, but sometimes it's just not, PLG model is just not a fit. The other thing is, when I see that there's potential for a company to have a PLG model, when I'm advising companies, etc., I always ask them first, what is the state of your monetization user journey? And they say, what? And I say, what does the funnel look like today? From acquisition to activation, conversion, engagement and retention, and expansion, if there is an expansion. What do those numbers look like? And if you had to put it on a map and you had to assign a color, red, yellow, or green, what's working well and what are problem areas, what colors would you assign? And what are those metrics? And a lot of times people don't have this. So the first step is to actually just generate this assessment. But once you have this assessment, you get a clearer understanding of what is your funnel, where is the money coming from, where are the leaky parts of the bucket, and if you were to apply any PLG strategies, where might you start? For B2B SaaS, usually, if you've already have product market fit, maybe retention is a little bit better, and then you want to focus on top of funnel. But you should do this assessment, and you should continue to monitor the state of your entire funnel, month over month, quarter over quarter, etc. And then lastly, let's say you do this assessment, and then you have, some ideas about where you want to concentrate. What are the right mechanics for you? Where do you want to start? There's a lot of different methodologies, PLG methodologies or mechanics that you can apply. They may not always make sense with your product or with your go-to-market motion or where those, yellow and red areas are. Again, nuance of your product and your customer, but you can try a few different things that might make sense if you want to accelerate any metric movement or you want to, drive efficiency. People talk about freemium motions, free trial motions. Vincent, you asked about product-led acquisition and the expansion motions. There's also product-led acquisition to drive net new user accounts instead of just expanding within an account. There's that API between product and sales via the product-led sales motion. There's a lot of different mechanics. You can start to kind of figure out which methodology you want to choose based on this end-to-end assessment, and then start designing your experiments against those. And again, managing your expectations about how long it's going to take to see if that strategy works.
Amazing. Before we wrap up for today, is there anything else you still want to add?
I could say that, for folks who are determining whether or not PLG is right for them or they should try it, the one other pattern I've noticed when I talk to startups or do some advising is that sometimes people jump to wanting to drive growth or implementing a PLG motion too fast and haven't yet actually proved product market fit. And so I'll ask people, before I even ask people, what does your monetization journey look like? I will ask this question: is how confident are you that your product has product market fit? And you'd be surprised. A lot of people say, I'm not that confident. And then we'll start to talk about, what are the signals that drive that feeling of either confidence or lack of confidence. I say, if you're not confident, why are you thinking about implementing a PLG motion? You should make sure your product actually has value before you try all of these different things and strategies to scale the product. Because trust me, I was at a startup. I've worked at a startup where we tried to drive growth. We spent a lot of money trying to drive growth for something that just didn't really stick with customers. And it was a constant uphill battle. It was like pushing an elephant uphill. Don't do it. That's not where you should be focusing your time and attention. It's much too early. So make sure you have that confidence, and that confidence is coming from some substantial material or evidence before you decide to implement strategies or even hire a team against PLG.
That's a great insight to close with. Thanks so much for joining today, Japna.
You're very welcome. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, that brings us to the end. I couldn't agree more that the decision between PLG and sales is not binary. It's a spectrum that can even change over time. And I love the idea of being patient and giving a strategy a proper try, so you can either qualify or disqualify it instead of coming back to it in cycles. For more insights like this, check out my book about product-led sales on plgandsales.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.